Hello there and welcome to another Bobeats video and welcome to Summer of Synths, and today we are gonna take a look at 10 tips for the Syntakt that you need to know about. And with me today I have a very special guest that will help me showcase what you can do with the Syntakt and help you get more out of it.
Thank you so much for having me, Bo. Hi everyone, my name's Eric and I produce and perform electronic music and make YouTube videos about producing and performing music under the name SURCO. I recently got a message from the always awesome Bobeats asking if I would come on and share some of my tips on using the Electron Syntakt for performance. As this is a big part of what I cover on my channel, I was of course thrilled to be asked, and I'm thrilled to be here with you to share some of the fun ways that I like to use the Syntakt.
Several of my Syntakt tips will involve the effects block because it's one of the unique features of the Syntakt. It's something that isn't there on any other Electron device, not even analog rhythm. So one thing you can use the effects block for is transitions. So here I have a beat running. And if I want to, I can use it to send to the effects block. So what I'm doing is I'm sending a couple of the tracks to the effects block, and the effects block in turn has some effects automation going on, also low cutting everything, so cutting a lot of the bass. And let me quickly show you how it's done. So we have a kick here. Let's send all the tracks. We can also send to the reverb. Now what's neat here is that we can actually lengthen the pattern to 64 steps, go back to the effects track, and now we can record some effects automation. And some filter automation. So of course you can make it sound more pretty, but it's just a simple way of creating a bit of a transition effect.
When you're building out tracks for performance, one of the most important things that you want to do is build yourself some options that you can use to play and perform while you're doing your live show. One of the easiest ways to do this is with the fill function. So the page button over here also doubles as the fill button. And in order to show how we set that up, we're going to use just a basic kick and clap. So traditionally you'd have your clap on the 5 and 13, that would be your most basic. But if we wanted to add in some claps to be able to use them as a fill option later on, we can add in some trigs here, and then we're going to go to the condition and we're going to turn that condition to fill. And what that means is that when this fill button is pressed down, those will play, and when it's not pressed down, they won't play. And then if we want to copy these over, we can just hold them all down and hit copy. Just hold the first button and paste, it'll copy the 4 there. Hold the first one, paste, first one, paste. And there we go. Now we have 16 trigs that all have a clap on them. But when we play this now, we're still only hearing the 5 and the 13 because they're set to play 100% of the time, and the others are set to play only when the fill is pressed down. This can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. It works really great with claps as well as with snares. You can use it to build up a snare roll after a big long break, or do clap rolls as you're hearing here, or you can actually just use it to perform in some little bit of clap fills while you're performing along. I love to use polyrhythms and polymeters in my music. For those of you who are unfamiliar, polyrhythms are different divisions of the same length pattern, and polymeters are combinations of different length patterns with the same tempo. The Syntakt has some really fun and really easy ways to introduce both of these to your music. The modifier number 1 on the Syntakt is a retrigger function, and what's really interesting about this is each one of the different pads, when this is selected, becomes a retrigger that is assignable to a different number of steps for the given pattern length. So you hit function and the up arrow to get you to this menu where you can set each one of the 4 triggers just by changing these. So you can set it to 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, 6th, 8th, 10th. So what's great about that is that you can set each one in any way that you would like to in order to create some really interesting polyrhythms in your music. A trick that I like to use for this is to duplicate a sound on 2 tracks next to each other. So we have a kick on 9 and the exact same kick sound on 10, but 10 doesn't have any triggers. 9 has just a 4 on the floor bass. What we'll do is we'll hit track and 10, so that selects that track, and that makes it so that the retrigger works for that track. Now, it may just sound like those are speeding up, but they're actually playing more notes in the same amount of space that this kick drum is going to be playing 4 of them. This is our track 9 playing a regular 4 on the floor kick. And if we want to make something polyrhythmic and interesting, we can add in a 1-3, which means in that same space that 9 is doing 4 hits, 3 is doing 3 hits. This mod is set up to do 6 hits in that same space. This can be used to add a whole bunch of interest to things like kick lines or percussion lines or things, but it can also be used melodically. So we have the same idea set up here for a melodic pattern. On track 5, we have this melody set up. And we have that same sound on track 6, but tuned up an octave, so it'll make it easier for you to hear the difference between the two. So when we hit play, 5 will play, and then we've got 6 set up to be triggered in that polyrhythmic way. 3 hits, 5 hits, 6 hits, 12 hits, and those can all be assigned as you like. And now we'll just play those same things, adding in a kick drum to set time so you can hear the different rhythms. And polymeters are equally as easy to set up on here. So we have, again, 2 different tracks set up with similar sounds on them. But you can hear that they're set up to do the exact same thing on both tracks. They each have a hit on 1 and 3, and they're set to be 16 steps long. What we'll do here is we're going to let one stay 16 steps, and I'm going to reduce the other one down to a shorter number of steps. And you can hear how they will phase in and out of time with one another. And if you have them set as the same sound, that can be really interesting. Or if you have counter melodies or counter rhythms within your music, you can do this as a really easy way to add some great variation to your music. So here we go with the 2 to start together. And we'll put in a kick drum just to keep time for us. And then what we're going to do is go into the higher pitched sound of the 2. And we are going to reduce that track length down from 16 down to 12. Then that pattern will repeat at that pace, while the other one is repeating at 16 steps before each repeat.
The next tip I have is using CTRL ALL to generate variations of an already existing pattern. So let's copy this pattern here. And now save it. So it's saved to the temp area, so you can always revert using function and no, reverting back to its previous state. And let's play. I mean, this is pretty nice. So let's create another variation. just pitching everything down is kind of sweet. And my favorite thing is, of course, creating effects transitions. Something like that.
One of the really interesting new functions on the Syntakt is the effects block and being able to send different tracks to it at different times. If you set this up prior to your performance in a way that you can use during your performance, again, it gives you options, much like all the other things that we're talking about today. So to set up the effects block, you hit Function Effects, and that takes you to the page where you can decide what you want to send to the effects block. So we're going to send everything except the kick drum for this example that we're going to do here. And that's going to include the delay and the reverb master. And what we're going to set up here is a ducking effect that can be controlled even more so than a sidechain on a compressor to give you some really interesting performative opportunities and the ability to control it much better than you can get with a regular sidechain. So in order to set that up, we're going to hit Track and Effects, and then these pages up here become the controllers for the effects track. So if we go to the amp page, you'll notice we have a different type of amp here, and that can be modified. You can change the mode to different kinds of amps if you'd like, but we're using the negative amp envelope. And what's cool about this is you can see that it will dip rather than add as a regular amp envelope would, and you can control your attack. You can control the hold time, you can control the decay time, and you can control the depth. And this mimics in a compressor where you would control your attack, your threshold, your release time, all of those things, but you can control each one. We have this set up as a master effect. And in order to hear this, we have a bass line and a chord pattern set up. We can't hear the effect yet because the effects track is muted. So it has a mute just like all of these do when you're in mute mode. And then we also don't have anything sequenced. This effect isn't something that just happens by itself. It's something that we actually have the control over sequencing. So when we're on our effects page, if we hit record, we're now on a step sequencing page for sequencing the effects block. So if we add this exact same hits that we have on the kick drum, and we're telling this to duck out of the way each time there's one of these hits, this will duck just as a sidechain compressor would, but we're not only limited to these spaces. We can sequence it to duck anywhere we choose to, which can become really interesting for performance. And we can adjust how much duck by changing the depth. And it's also interesting because if we take the kick out, the duck is still there. And that can be controlled. Let me add the kick back in. And because there's a mute for this, if we don't want this to be all the time, we can take it off. And it will play right straight through, but then if we want to add more pumping at a certain part in the performance, we just unmute it. And we're unmuting the sequencing of the effects track.
Before we move on with the video, I just want to mention our Summer of Synths sponsor, DistroKid. So if the Summer of Synths videos have inspired you to create some music and you want to release it, you should use DistroKid. Super affordable. I've been with them for years. They're very quick to get the music onto stores, and it only costs $20 a year, and you can upload unlimited amounts to all the relevant stores like Spotify, iTunes. We got Amazon Music, we got Tidal. So one of my favorite features is that when you have uploaded a track and it's live on the different stores, all of the links are collected into what's called a hyperfollow page. And on this page, your fans and listeners can find links to all your music in all the stores. So you don't have to do it manually, but you can also add other links to this page as well. So it's just a very nice collect all page where you have all your links so people can find the music. Thank you so much DistroKid for all the years of supporting Bobeats, and thank you for supporting Summer of Synths. Next up, let's talk about the sound pool. It's something you really need to use. It opens up the device a lot. So we have the different sounds here, and you can change the sounds by hitting function and turning this knob here. So you can load something else. But what we also can do is hit function, sound, and go into sound manager. And here you can see a lot of different sounds. And if you find something we like, we just hit the right arrow here and we say copy to sound pool. Boom, copied. We can also mark multiple sounds. And the way it works is if we enter the step sequencer mode, I put down the kick sounds, and those are the sounds for the track. And now we can just put down a snare here. So put down a step and turn this button here. And now we're choosing from the sound pool. Let's go. Let's filter and find a hi-hat that can be loaded. This one is nice. Copy to sound pool. Go out, go into the step sequencer, turn the knob here, find it. And now, if you want to be quick about it, just hold it down, copy it. So now we have that particular sound copied, paste it. And if you want to vary it, just go into trig, change condition. Change the filter setting to high pass on some sounds. Add some reverb. Nice. Pretty cool. So that's how you utilize the sound pool, and the basic strategy that I use is just I make sure that I have a lot of kicks, hi-hats, snare type sounds loaded, and then I could create a groove just using one track. Not that you don't have enough tracks, but sometimes it just makes for something more creative, something more fun. And for fun, let's add in some more elements here. Just some bass sounds and some more percussive noises on some of the other tracks.
Using pattern mutes, global mutes, and the mixer pages is a great way to smooth transitions and introduce new elements in your tracks. With performance in mind, they've included a way to get to a mixer page by pushing function and LFO. And on this first page of the mixer, you have tracks 1 through 8, so you have all of the digital tracks. If you do function and LFO a second time, you have all of the analog tracks as well as the effects track, and then the master, delay, and reverb volume. And then by pressing it one more time, you have a mixer for an exterior input coming in where you can balance, add reverb, add delay, or send that external audio to the effects block. Having this mixer page for performance allows you to smoothly bring in and out different elements rather than just muting and unmuting, or having to go to an individual channel, adjust the volume, unmute, redo the volume. You can bring in and out different things together. And if we want to bring in our bass and our chords at the same time, and it's much smoother than having to go track to track. Another way to bring elements in and out is obviously the mute buttons, and there's a couple of different mute modes. You'll notice these ones are purple right now. Those are pattern mutes. which means that as I mute and unmute things, I'm only unmuting them and muting them for this pattern. So if I decide to switch to another pattern, I can have that pattern already set up with things muted and unmuted, and they won't be affected by this at all. If we hit function and mute mode another time, we come to the global mutes. And what these ones are, the green mutes, this means that if I mute my kick drum on this pattern and I switch to another pattern, the kick drum will also be muted, which can be used as well for smooth transitions. If you want to take things out on one pattern, bring in another one, and then bring those elements in one by one, you can do that using the global mutes.
Let's yet again go back to the effects block, because that's where a lot of interesting things happen on the Syntakt. So we have the effects track here, and you can sequence changes to the send of the reverb and delay, but that is not everything that you can do with effects, because there is a little bit of a hidden feature. If you hit function and reverb or delay, you have access to the settings of the reverb and delay, and these can be sequenced. So we have this track here. And let's say we want to send to the reverb here on the second page. So let's set up a send here. So we're just doing like this. Now let's say we want also changes to the settings of the delay and reverb. And we can, of course, parameter lock it. So we can go in here and just hold a step, change the values. But we can also just automate it. And let's add some delay. You get the idea. You can lock parameters for the delay and reverb per step, or you could just automate it by live recording changes to these settings. It's a small tip, but I think it's quite useful.
The different keyboard modes in the Syntakt allow for live improvisations on their own or in combination with sequenced melodies. By pressing function and track, that gets us into keyboard mode. If we function and then long press track, it gets us into a way to control that keyboard mode. Using this encoder, we can set what scale we would like this to be in. So we'll just put it in a minor scale. You can set your root note so you know exactly what the scale is going to be. So right now we have this in a C minor. And then you have a couple of options over here on the side where it says fold on or off. If fold is off, you have a regular chromatic keyboard in the C minor scale. And if you hit the buttons that are not included in the scale, nothing will play. So only the ones lit up are the ones that are part of that C minor scale. But if we then turn on the fold, what this does is instead of having one octave of chromatic keyboard, we have 2 octaves of the C minor scale. And we can octave those up and down using the up and down arrows. And that gives us an opportunity to improvise without hitting a wrong note during a performance. This live performance keyboard mode can be used whether or not a track is active. You can layer live notes over the top of a sequenced pattern, keeping in mind it's not polyphonic, so that if you hit a note where there's a note in the sequence, the note that you hit on the keyboard will replace that note in the sequence, but you can create some really interesting improvisations using this. Or if you would like to just use that sound and perform it, you can mute that track. And when you're back in keyboard mode, so you have a lot of options using the keyboard mode to be able to perform with or instead of sequenced patterns.
There's a simple tip that you really should use. If you're going to filter here, the second page, you can see that we have a filter here that lets you cut the bass and lets you cut the higher frequencies. And when you have a kick and a bass running like this, they kind of clash in terms of frequencies. So just pull it up all the way and then listen. So around here is a nice spot. So for the digital tracks, using this high cut and low cut filter is super useful to just make your mixes a little bit less muddy. Now for the next tip, we're going back here to the effects block and transitions. So here I have a pattern. And nothing is sending to the effects block. But if I change the pattern, you see how it's suddenly sending to the effects block. This is because the routing to the effects block is saved with the pattern. So on this pattern here, no routing, and if we change back, you can see here, these are routed. So this can be utilized to have different variations of the same patterns with certain tracks being sent to the effects block and some are not. So for my example here, I'm just using it as a transition pattern, so we can go from Guess what the next tip is about? Well, it's about the effects block. So this is just a small thing. So if you check here, so if we set the level, so we have track 1 here, we set the level, then we hit effects block, we send it to the effects block, go out. You can see how the graphics have changed. We can now lower it. So now we're not sending to the effects block and you can hear the kick. Let's send it. Basically, we have an individual level control for the effects block. And this can be super useful for the previous mentioned transition technique that I told you about. So keep it in mind that you can set the level independently when something is routed to the effects block and when it's not.
I hope you got something interesting from these tips. And if you like this kind of content, check out my channel, SURCO. Thanks again, Bo, for having me out. I really appreciate it. It's been a big pleasure. I hope to see you all again soon. And in the meantime, take care of each other.
So big thank you to today's special guest. I've linked him down in the description. Be sure to go and check him out. And as always, a big thank you for you being here. Be sure to check out this year's sponsor for Summer of Synths, DistroKid, linked in the description. Have a great summer. Talk to you later.